There exists a peculiar alchemy in moments of crisis, where the thin veneer of civilization strips away and human beings confront their most fundamental selves. The frozen embrace captures this transformation through the merciless lens of a winter blizzard, a force of nature so overwhelming that it renders meaningless all the careful boundaries we maintain between ourselves and strangers. Blizzard arrives not as a gentle snowfall, but as nature's fury incarnate, a white wall of wind and ice that devours the landscape with indiscriminate hunger. Visibility collapses to mere feet. Temperatures plummet to life-threatening depths. In such conditions, survival ceases to be a philosophical concept and becomes an immediate, visceral demand. The storm doesn't negotiate or show mercy. It simply exists as an elemental force that strips away pretense and exposes the raw truth of human fragility. Into this maelstrom, two strangers find themselves thrust together by circumstance rather than choice. She is a woman who has cultivated her independence like armor, someone accustomed to navigating the world on her own terms, making her own decisions, and requiring nothing from anyone. Her self-sufficiency isn't merely a personality trait, it's a philosophy, perhaps even a defense mechanism against a world that has taught her that reliance on others invites disappointment or worse. He is a rancher, stoic in the way men who work the land often become, shaped by seasons of hardship into someone who speaks through action rather than words, whose strength manifests not in bravado but in quiet endurance. Their initial encounter crackles with tension. Suspicion is natural when strangers meet under extreme circumstances, each carrying their own histories, their own reasons for wariness. She likely questions his motives, wondering if his offer of shelter comes with unspoken expectations. He perhaps bristles at the intrusion into his carefully ordered solitude, this unexpected responsibility for another life when he's accustomed to answering only to himself and his land. The confined space they share, whether a remote cabin, a stranded vehicle, or some makeshift shelter, amplifies every glance, every word, every awkward silence. Yet beneath this friction lies something more substantial, an underlying strength in both individuals that the crisis begins to reveal. Her independence isn't weakness masquerading as self-reliance. It's genuine competence, resourcefulness, a capacity to face difficulty without crumbling. His stoicism isn't emotional emptiness, but rather a deep reservoir of resilience, the kind that comes from years of confronting challenges without the luxury of surrender. As the storm rages, these qualities emerge not through grand declarations but through small, telling moments. Her quick thinking with limited resources, his practiced efficiency in creating warmth from almost nothing. The rescue itself becomes harrowing, precisely because it matters. Whether he pulls her from a snowdrift where she might have frozen, or she tends to an injury that could have proven fatal, the act transcends simple assistance. In that moment, one person holds another's life in their hands, and the weight of that responsibility creates a connection that cannot be easily dismissed or forgotten. This isn't the superficial gratitude of someone holding a door open. This is the profound recognition that you exist now because someone else chose to act, to risk, to care when they could have turned away. From this crucible emerges an unspoken pact, formed not through words but through shared experience. They have seen each other at their most vulnerable, stripped of all social performance, reduced to the essential question of survival. This creates an intimacy that typically requires months or years to develop, a foundation of trust built in hours, through necessity rather than choice. As the storm eventually weakens and the immediate danger passes, they are left with this invisible bond, this knowledge of each other that will inevitably draw them together again, transforming what began as a desperate alliance into the foundation for something neither anticipated but both, perhaps, desperately needed. *The storm may have passed, but its aftermath proves far more treacherous than the blizzard itself. In small towns, where everyone knows everyone else's business or believes they do, the return of two people who spent a night alone together becomes less a story of survival and more fodder for speculation, innuendo, and moral judgment. The very act that saved her life now threatens to destroy her reputation, transforming a moment of desperate necessity into something sordid in the collective imagination of a community that measures worth through the narrow lens of propriety. Gossip travels with frightening speed through small-town networks, moving from the general store to the church steps, from sewing circles to dinner tables, each retelling embellishing details that no one actually knows. The whispers begin innocuously enough concern, perhaps, or curiosity about what happened during those hours when the world disappeared behind walls of white. But curiosity quickly curdles into assumption, and assumption hardens into judgment. People who weren't there, who didn't feel the cold's deadly grip or understand the binary choice between shelter and death, suddenly become experts on what should or shouldn't have happened, on what her presence in his home really means. The woman finds herself subjected to a particular species of scrutiny reserved for those who violate unwritten social codes. Eyes follow her through town. Conversations pause when she enters a room, then resume in hushed tones the moment she passes. Some women who once greeted her warmly now offer only tight-lipped nods or deliberate avoidance, as though her perceived transgression might be contagious. The men's reactions vary between uncomfortable distance and something more predatory, a knowing look. An inappropriate familiarity, as though her compromised reputation has somehow made her available, diminished her right to dignity and respect. Her fiercely independent spirit, which served her so well during the crisis, now becomes a liability in navigating this social minefield. She refuses to apologize for surviving, refuses to bow her head in shame for an act she committed no sin in performing. This defiance, admirable as it is, only deepens the community's disapproval. A woman who shows remorse, who performs contrition even for imagined offenses, might be forgiven in time. But one who stands tall, who meets judgment with her chin raised and eyes unflinching, threatens the social order that demands female deference and conformity. Yet her independence, genuine as it is, cannot completely shield her from the practical consequences of ostracism. In a small town, reputation isn't merely social currency, it's economic survival. Shopkeepers become less accommodating, business opportunities evaporate, invitations cease. She begins to understand the precariousness of her position, how a woman alone, without family connections or male protection, exists at the mercy of community goodwill that can be withdrawn at a moment's notice. The very self-sufficiency she's cultivated becomes harder to maintain. When doors close and assistance disappears. Meanwhile, the rancher observes this injustice unfold with growing disquiet. He hears the whispers, notes the changed treatment, watches as a woman who did nothing wrong suffers consequences while he, the man in the equation, faces barely a raised eyebrow. This double standard ignites something in him, a quiet resolve that begins as a spark of indignation and builds into something more purposeful. His stoicism, that carefully maintained emotional distance, cracks as he witnesses her isolation and public shaming. He recognizes the fundamental unfairness. She saved herself by accepting his help, and now society punishes her for it while he remains largely unscathed. His growing awareness becomes intolerable, a weight on his conscience that demands action. The very qualities that allowed him to endure harsh seasons and physical hardship now focus on a different kind of challenge, standing against the collective judgment of a community he's lived among his entire life. This observation period marks a crucial shift in their dynamic. What began as an emergency alliance and transformed into an unspoken connection now evolves into something more deliberate. He must decide whether to remain a silent witness to injustice or to act, knowing that defending her will invite scrutiny, questions, and possibly condemnation upon himself. There comes a moment in every person's life when they must choose between comfortable silence and costly truth, between preserving their own peace and defending what's right. For the rancher, this moment arrives not with fanfare, but in the ordinary setting of daily life, perhaps at the town meeting, in the general store, or on the church steps, when someone makes yet another cutting remark about the woman who dared to survive a blizzard in unconventional circumstances. And this time, instead of maintaining his characteristic silence, he speaks. His public support doesn't manifest as a grand speech or dramatic gesture. Men like him don't operate that way. Instead, it comes as a firm correction, a refusal to let the lie stand unchallenged, a deliberate positioning of himself beside her when the safer choice would be to maintain distance. He states the simple truth. She would have died without shelter, and he provided it, and anyone suggesting impropriety reveals more about their own character than hers. The words may be few, but their impact reverberates through a community unaccustomed to having their collective judgment questioned, especially by one of their own. This act costs him immediately. The rancher has lived his entire life as part of this community's fabric, trusted, respected, left alone in the way self-sufficient men who don't cause trouble are left alone. By choosing to defend her, he fractures that easy acceptance. Suddenly he faces questions about his own judgment, his motives, his relationship with this woman. Friends become distant, business relationships cool, invitations to community events become scarce. The very stability he's built through years of quiet competence begins to crack under the weight of social disapproval. Yet something profound shifts in the dynamic between the two of them. They are no longer victim and witness, no longer simply two people bound by a shared trauma. They become allies in a more conscious, chosen sense, partners in defiance against a judgment they both recognize as unjust. Where their connection was forged initially in survival's crucible, it now strengthens through shared principle, through the recognition that they both value truth and fairness more than comfort and acceptance. This shared adversity creates an intimacy different from their first encounter. When they faced the blizzard, they had no choice but to rely on each other. Now, they choose to stand together when walking away would be easier. She sees in his defense not just kindness but courage, the willingness to sacrifice his own standing for someone else's dignity. He sees in her refusal to be cowed not just stubbornness but genuine strength of character. A backbone that won't bend even when bending would make life easier. From this fertile ground, attraction blooms into something richer and more substantial than mere physical appeal. The initial spark, perhaps noticed during those close quarters of the storm, in a moment when firelight caught her features or his quiet competence struck her unexpectedly, now ignites into genuine regard. She respects him not because he rescued her from the snow, but because he continues to rescue her from a different kind of cold, the isolation of social exile. He admires her not simply for surviving, but for refusing to apologize for her survival, for maintaining her dignity when surrender would be understandable. This is attraction built on the firmest foundation, mutual protection, shared values, demonstrated character under pressure. They have seen each other tested, not once but repeatedly, and found each other worthy. What grows between them isn't the shallow infatuation of initial chemistry, but the deeper recognition of finding someone whose inner landscape mirrors your own, whose moral compass points in the same direction, whose courage matches yours when courage is costly. Their connection deepens from necessity to choice, from alliance to affection, from respect to something that begins to feel like the early stirrings of love. They recognize in each other a kindred spirit, someone willing to weather not just nature's storms but society's as well, someone who values the other's well-being enough to risk their own comfort and security. This unconventional stand transforms them from strangers thrown together by fate into partners bound by conscious decision and growing devotion, * opposition. When it finally coalesces into organized resistance, arrives with the weight of institutional authority behind it. The town elders, those self-appointed guardians of moral order and social convention, recognize in this developing bond between the rancher and the woman something more threatening than mere scandal. They see defiance, a rejection of their right to dictate acceptable behavior, a dangerous precedent that might encourage others to question the rigid structures that maintain their power and influence. The conservative factions mobilize with righteous certainty, convinced they're protecting community values from contamination. Church leaders speak from pulpits about the importance of propriety and reputation. Business owners discuss the rancher's poor judgment in terms that make clear his continued acceptance depends on correction, of course. Social pressure intensifies systematically, invitations withdrawn, contracts reconsidered, long-standing relationships contingent suddenly on conditions that amount to abandoning her. The message crystallizes with brutal clarity: rejoin the fold by rejecting her, or face exile alongside her. For the rancher, this escalation carries particular weight. His entire life has been built here, his land, his livelihood, his identity as part of this place. The ranch has been in his family for generations, roots sunk deep into soil his grandfather cleared and his father worked. To lose the community's goodwill means more than social inconvenience. It threatens the practical foundations of his existence. Neighboring ranchers who once helped with difficult tasks now find themselves too busy. Suppliers become less reliable. The informal networks of mutual aid that make rural life sustainable begin to fray. Yet paradoxically, this external pressure forges their connection into something unbreakable. They discover that combined resilience exceeds the sum of individual strengths. Her fierce independence complements his quiet determination. Her refusal to yield balances his strategic patience. His steady presence grounds her righteous anger. Together, they weather storms of disapproval that might have broken either one alone. Each small act of defiance, each refusal to capitulate to unjust demands, becomes both a declaration of principle and an expression of devotion. This shared struggle reveals something fundamental about love's nature, that true connection often demands sacrifice, asks us to choose between comfort and commitment, between easy acceptance and costly loyalty. They learn that loving someone sometimes means standing with them when the entire world stands against you both, means valuing their dignity above your own peace, means defending a bond that others cannot or will not understand. But external conflict has a way of creating space for internal revelation. As they spend more time together, supporting each other through daily indignities and overt hostilities, their carefully maintained defenses begin to crack. She reveals the wounds that forged her independence, perhaps abandonment, betrayal, or loss that taught her that relying on others meant inevitable pain. Her self-sufficiency, he discovers, isn't just strength but also armor protecting a heart that's been broken before. He, in turn, shares the traumas hidden beneath his stoicism. Maybe he lost someone to the land's harshness, or failed to protect someone he loved, or carries guilt that transformed him from an open young man into someone who walls off emotion as protection against further hurt. His silence, she learns, isn't absence of feeling but an overflow of it, carefully contained because feeling too much once cost him everything. These vulnerabilities, shared in quiet moments stolen from external chaos, deepen their bond beyond attraction or alliance into genuine intimacy. They see each other's scars and recognize not weakness but survival, not damage but resilience. Understanding blooms from these revelations, comprehension of why independence matters so fiercely to her, why commitment terrifies him even as he demonstrates it through action, why they both built walls that only extraordinary circumstances could breach. The price of their protection of each other proved steep, measured in lost relationships, damaged reputations, economic hardship, and social isolation. Yet what they gain a love forged in fire, tested by adversity, built on mutual knowledge of each other's deepest fears and finest qualities, becomes worth every cost. They discover that some bonds justify any sacrifice, that finding someone willing to weather the storm beside you matters more than shelter from it. Every great love story arrives at a crossroads where the lovers must decide what their bond is worth, what they're willing to sacrifice or endure to preserve it. For the rancher and the woman, this moment crystallizes with stark clarity. Surrender to the pressure that promises restored acceptance and comfortable conformity, or forge ahead into uncertain territory, claiming the right to define their relationship on their own terms, regardless of community approval. The temptation to yield is real and understandable. The town offers a clear path back to normalcy. Distance themselves from each other, let time pass, allow the scandal to fade, return to their separate lives with reputations eventually restored. It would be the sensible choice, the practical one, the path that preserves everything they've built in this place. But sensibility and love often stand at odds, and they have learned something the town cannot teach, that a connection forged in survival, strengthened by shared defiance, and deepened through mutual vulnerability is not something you abandon to placate those who were never there, who never understood, who never will doubt their decision when it comes, carries the weight of permanence. Perhaps they marry in defiance of those who say they should be ashamed, or perhaps they simply continue their bond openly, refusing to hide or apologize. Maybe they stay and face the disapproval together, or maybe they leave to build something new elsewhere, taking only what they can carry and the certainty they've found in each other. Whatever form their choice takes, it represents a fundamental assertion that love defined by those who experience it matters more than love approved by those who merely observe it. This defiance reverberates through the community in ways they cannot immediately perceive. Initially, there's shock, perhaps even intensified condemnation. But over time, something shifts. Their story, the blizzard, the rescue, the public shaming, the steadfast loyalty takes on mythic qualities in the retelling. What began as scandal transforms into legend, the kind of tale people tell around fires and dinner tables. That gets embellished with each generation but maintains its essential truth. Years later, young people in love but facing obstacles find courage in their example. A woman defying her family's choice of husband whispers their names like a prayer for strength. A man choosing his heart over his inheritance remembers that others have paid this price before and survived, even thrived. The town itself, slowly, grudgingly, begins to recognize that the very qualities it condemned, fierce independence, unwavering loyalty, the courage to stand against collective judgment, are the same qualities it claims to admire when displayed in less threatening contexts. Their legend becomes a mirror the community must eventually face, revealing the gap between professed values and practiced prejudice, between the frontier spirit they romanticize and the conformity they enforce. Some never reconcile this contradiction, carrying their disapproval to their graves. But others, particularly those who felt the weight of judgment themselves, find in this story permission to live more authentically, to question whether community approval is worth the cost of personal truth. The most powerful message embedded in their story isn't the romance itself, but what that romance reveals about love's true foundation. They prove that lasting devotion isn't built primarily on shared interests or compatible personalities, though these matter. It's not sustained by passion alone, though fire has its place. Instead, genuine love rests on unwavering loyalty demonstrated when loyalty costs something. On the courage to protect what you cherish even when protection makes you vulnerable. On choosing each other repeatedly when each choice carries consequences. Their bond illustrates that love at its finest is an act of defiance against cynicism, against convenience, against the voices insisting you should settle for less or conform to others' visions of what your heart should want. It's the willingness to say, this person, this connection, this truth between us matters more than comfort, more than approval, more than the easy path. It's understanding that some things are worth fighting for, worth sacrificing for, worth standing alone with someone against the world for. In the end, they discover what every great love story teaches, that the frontier requiring the most courage to cross isn't geographical but internal. That pioneering spirit finds its highest expression not in claiming land, but in claiming the right to love as you choose, and that true grit reveals itself not in weathering nature's storms, but in weathering human judgment with dignity, devotion, and unshakable faith in what two people have found in each other against all odds.